All right, well, guys, today I wanted to discuss the current situation surrounding the Panama Canal. Will Trump be able to get it back? What is Panama going to want? Are they going to fight this? And why is Donald Trump so adamant, and he said it during his inauguration speech, about getting the canal back as part of the United States? First off, we do not want to annex Panama. The country is different from the canal, and we did control the Panama Canal. It's called the Panama Canal Zone. It's not even a territory, it's a zone. That's what we would want control of. Trump is correct in terms of there's significant Chinese influence surrounding the canal at both ends, to where multiple ports have been bought up by the Chinese, and they went into a diplomatic relationship with Panama. Panama basically chose the Chinese over Taiwan, which was a huge win for the CCP. And it's a major issue when it comes to a direct violation of the Monroe Doctrine. And that's what Trump's going to cite in terms of the United States trying to get the canal back. He's already said he's going to tariff Panama. And we did invade Panama back in 1989. That was to overthrow a dictator, and it was very successful. It was extremely quick. I'm not saying the United States is going to invade Panama to get the canal back, but there might be a naval blockade of the canal. We do know that Panama is very reliant on U.S. ships paying tolls for the canal. If you look at the numbers, it's around 65 to 70% of the ships per year that go through the canal are U.S. based. And you also do have around $3.5 to $4 billion in toll revenue for Panama. The United States gets none of that, yet we built it back in the early 1900s. If you remember, originally the French wanted it to build the canal, and it was a very ambitious project considering the technology and the way the canal operates. In the late 1800s, they did not have the money, they didn't have the financing. They abandoned the project during early stages of construction, and the United States took it over in 1904, and it took around 10 years to build, and it was, if you adjust it for inflation, a $10 billion project. That's modern money. So that's a huge investment into it, and the United States operated it. We owned it. It was called the Panama Canal Zone. There were many American babies born in the Panama Canal Zone, and we ended up losing it. Mainly, it started in 1977 when it was given up for $1. Originally, there was an agreement to where we would control it in tandem with Panama for about 22 years, and then we gave it up fully in 1999 to Panama as like an act of grace because of the situation. After World War II, the Cold War era, people didn't like the idea of almost like an empire to where you own different areas of land in other countries and things like that. But obviously, this is a specific situation to where we built this. And you can see this article, does China operate the Panama Canal, as Trump says? Well, no, not literally, but figuratively, this is the Chinese strategy. It's called soft influence. They came out and they said this in the early 2000s. They've also said they want to overtake the United States in terms of being the number one superpower in the world. And honestly, I've got mixed feelings on that. Obviously, I don't want China to have all this crazy influence over the world entirely. I also think what happens in the United States is more important than worrying about an arms race to where we slightly inch ahead of China in terms of GDP and things like that. I think living quality in the U.S. is more important, and that's where the whole immigration thing comes in. But in general, when you look at a situation like this, it's pretty clear cut. The United States built this. Panama is the one, yes, they did expand the canal. It cost about $7 billion expansion back in 2014, 2015, but it's like 5% of their total GDP comes from this canal. They're not going to want to give it up. And they're going to try and use the posturing of how dare you can't take this over. I mean, this was ours. Yes, we gave it up, but now we want it back because you guys have entered diplomatic agreements with China, who's our number one adversary. We built this for you. We did you guys a nice favor, and you've betrayed us by having these, you also betrayed Taiwan as well by having these diplomatic relationships with China. And we're going to go through this. So I'm just going to go through some of this article. What has Trump said about the canal? The mention of Panama in his inaugural speech is not the first time he has focused on Central America. And it's interesting because he singled out the canal but didn't talk about Greenland in his speech, possibly signaling that Greenland is going to be more of a negotiation, whereas Panama is going to have to be more threats and cutthroat type in terms of this is how we're requiring it. Greenland can be done more diplomatically, possibly as long as there's cooperation with Denmark. The idea, though, is that this really all should be able to be done diplomatically, and there shouldn't even have to be a naval blockade because of the power the United States has. You're able to enforce like economic pressure in terms of tariffs, in terms of threats against these countries, and basically the idea is you bully them into submission. But it is interesting that Trump talked about Panama but not Greenland. I still think Greenland is more likely and easier than Panama in terms of, and again, when I mentioned Panama, it's the zone. It's not the country of Panama. We want the control of the Panama Canal zone, or worst case scenario, we're going to maybe want a similar agreement to what we had with Panama from 1977 to 1999, where it's dual ownership with Panama, which honestly they should accept considering. And again, let's understand something. This whole thing is like, well, you gave it up, you don't get to have it back, that's on you. Well, yes, we gave it up, but we also have the Monroe Doctrine, which says that, if there's an foreign adversary from the East that goes into Central America, Latin America, and starts influencing there, we have a right to push back against that. And that's exactly what the Chinese have done. They buy up ports on each end of the canal, and now they've got a diplomatic relationship. So we're reacting to that, honestly. That's what Trump can spin this as, rather than, oh yeah, this domination and things like this. But imagine if Trump's able to get this back, it's $3 to $4 billion per year, and that's just, it's more money for the United States. But even in like a dual ownership type situation, or worst case scenario, all of the Chinese influence needs to leave the canal. This is absurd. This is very important. This is 5 to 10% of total ships, that use this canal per year. Pacific to Atlantic, Atlantic to Pacific. We built the thing. We invested money into doing it. We gave it up for nothing. And now you're going to make an alliance with the biggest adversary to the United States? Really? You think we're that dumb? We're just going to allow that? So see, understand, Trump's like 5 steps ahead of everyone talking about this type of stuff. It just makes sense. Why would we allow this? This is the naivety of liberals to just, oh, you can't do that. And it's like they would allow China to take over like all of South America. Then they'd be like, the United States is such a big bully. You can't disrupt that. It's like, but they do it via a soft invasion. That's why they're so dumb. You have to react and understand what the Chinese are doing. It's like they're just trying to ruffle feathers. They don't want an actual invasion like the Russians did with Ukraine. It's more so just, we're going to gain all this influence under your nose, and before you know it, now we've got all the influence and you're screwed. We don't want that. We don't want to let that happen, so we're trying to be proactive here. That's basically what Trump is saying. You can see, what's the history of the Panama Canal? The construction of the canal was completed in 1914. That's a U.S.-based project. It remained in U.S. control until 1977. Jimmy Carter signed a treaty handing over the canal to Panama. You can see it says gradually. That's because it was a dual ownership for about 22 years. Since 1999, the Canal Authority has held exclusive control over the operations. The Panama Canal Authority, basically Panama owns the canal. The United States, since 1999, has zero ownership of the canal that cost $10 billion to build, that now has seen influence being given up to China over the United States, when 60 to 70% of the ships that go through the canal are US based, and we built the thing, but China's going to have all this influence in the surrounding ports, and you're going to enter a diplomatic relationship with China over Taiwan, and you think we're going to be okay with that? Really? Seriously? Come on. Let's see this. China. What is China's role in terms of the operations? There is no public evidence to suggest that the Chinese government exercises control over the canal or its military. However, Chinese companies have a significant presence there. You can see it says that China, they would be number 2 in terms of the cargo ships traversing the canal. They're at 20%. The U.S., I think, is at 65 to 70%. Second largest ewer after the U.S. In recent years, China has also invested heavily in ports and terminals near the canal. And so these are the ports you can see at both ends. They've got significant investments. You see right here, there is an increasing geopolitical tension of economic nature between the U.S. and China. That kind of information regarding cargo would be very useful in the event of a supply chain war. Talking about the ships passing through and the amount of information the Chinese are able to extract with the ownership of the ports at both ends of the canal. And so it does make total sense for, and you can see this, Panama's strategic location means China has been vying to increase its influence in the country for years and extend its footprint on a continent that has traditionally been considered the backyard of the U.S. In 2017, Panama broke diplomatic ties with Taiwan and established formal relations with China, and that was a huge win for China. And you can see Panama became the first Latin American country to join China's signature Belt and Road Initiative, a $1 trillion global infrastructure and investment initiative. This is a total violation of the Monroe Doctrine. And so Trump can use this, and really, there's going to have to be some type of thing that happens with Panama here if Trump really wants to, because this is just the amount of influence that China is gathering around this canal is pretty remarkable. So if Trump does decide to do something, there's going to be tariffs initially. You're going to try and do it without any type of invasion, whether or not you want to seize control of the canal that way or try and force this diplomatic relationship between Panama and China to end. It's very clear that China slowly but surely is starting to gain more and more influence, and they do it through this soft power measure to where, if you're not paying attention, there's really not going to be an objection to what China is doing. This is just, obviously, the 2017, when you're talking about shifting from Taiwan to China in terms of having the diplomatic relations, that's a red alert there for the United States, and I'm sure Washington did not like that. But just in general, trying to force Panama to end their diplomatic relationship with China, or potentially just say, this is ours, we're taking it back over because you guys are entering a relationship with our number one adversary, so this can't happen. We built this thing anyways, and it generates $3 to $4 billion per year, and most of the ships that cross it, it's like 70% U.S. ships, 20% Chinese ships. So I think there's going to be something that Trump does, but that's just history on the canal, things like that, and why Trump would do something. But it is just going to start with threats in terms of affecting the Panamanian economy, and then if those don't work, we'll see what Trump ends up doing. And they're going to try and keep the canal. There's no doubt about it. And it'll be interesting. It seems like there's a lot going on right now with Trump and many different countries. Tariffs against Taiwan, tariffs against Panama, the situation with Greenland, the situation with Canada, Mexico, those two countries possibly getting hit with 25% tariffs. They're our biggest trading partners. There's a lot going on. So I'm not sure on the bandwidth of Trump in terms of everything with the tariffs and all these countries. But it's obvious that Trump does want to utilize tariffs and the United States power that we have in terms of our sheer military and economic might and flex it over these countries and generate revenue through proxy, which would be by the way of tariffs, because these countries would still have to trade with the United States because of how powerful and strong we are, and just the amount of resources that we demand. And these countries that have trading surpluses with us, they still need to trade with us even with the tariffs in place, to where we'll just be generating revenue even though they will continue to trade with us. You're basically using the United States power to our benefit by flexing, but not going overwhelming. Although obviously it would change if he did some type of naval blockade or something like that to the canal in order to get it. The question is, how far does Trump want to go? How far will Panama go in terms of keeping the canal? All of those things are going to be things that will really materialize and show us how will the canal's ownership change within the next few years with Trump in the White House. Will there be some type of an agreement to where it's part ownership, just like there was from 77 to 99? Will Panama say, no, we're with the Chinese now? And then that could be a big issue. Or will Trump just say, no, give it to us, and if you don't, we're going to implement a blockade, or we're going to implement an invasion to seize the Panama Canal Zone back for the United States? I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen. Obviously, those are all things that could happen. It just depends, how far does Trump want to take this, and what is the threat level that Trump and his administration deem for the Chinese influence over this zone. So guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.